Hi guys, in this video we're going to have a go at making a T-Rex cake. I wanted to make this because the Jurassic World film is coming out. Stay tuned till the end of the video to find out how long this one actually takes me to create. So I've started by printing off a picture. So make sure your board is bigger than your picture. And then I've got a thin cake card and I've cut out around my picture and I've cut the same shape out on my thin cake card. So the thicker board that we've got in the background, I'm just going to cover it in a piece of white fondant. Now I'm just going to roughly mark on where I want my background to be. I'm going to have like a bit of a landscape going on behind my dinosaur on my T-Rex. So if I put him there, I'll see how much of the board I'll see. So I've drawn a line and I've just got some blue edible dusts and I'm just brushing them just really lightly onto my fondant, just above the hillside. A little bit of black and cream mixed together should give us slightly grey, so I don't want my sky to look too blue. I'll put links in the description box below to everything I've used. And I'm just going to put some more fondant anywhere that I want to sort of stick out a little bit. And I've just got a nice pale green. So just give it a good push on with your fingers. And if anything on this bit, some fingerprints actually look quite nice because we want a bit of texture. Giving it a really good press onto your board. Do that on both sides. If you want more texture, there's all different kinds of things you can use. If you want, you could use a toothbrush for this. Just as long as it's a brand new one, you don't want to be using one you've already used. For brushing your teeth with, that is. And I'm just going to use some more of the edible dusts. So I've got a mix of different greens and browns and we're just going to brush them on with a dry brush and we'll try and make them as dark as possible, sort of in the creases, adding a bit more brown. You can even add a bit of black to those bits. So I'm putting my board to one side and I'm going to work on the cake. So I've cut off the sort of neck part, so I'm just left with the head, and I've actually got a 9-inch cake here. And I'm just going to use 2 layers of cake, a bit of buttercream in the middle. And I'm going to use that sort of dinosaur face as a template. So I'm just left with the basic outline. Cut all the way around your cake. Now if the cake starts crumbling a little bit, and it might do because it's quite soft, you might have to stick it in the freezer just for a little bit, just to firm it up so that we can work on it without it falling to pieces. I've got some chocolate ganache now that I've used. You can use buttercream still, but for this one I thought I'd use ganache because it's nice and firm. Just putting it onto my cake board and sticking the cake on there. So can you see where the edge of the jaw is? I've just cut a little line. I'm just going to mark that on my cake with my knife, and then we're going to cut, can you see, beyond the jaw, sort of onto the neck, so it just sits down a level. And then I'm going to use all my cake offcuts to stick onto the rest of that cake board, which is the neck, so they get nice and thin as they get to the base of our board. So I've cut out the whole eye area now on my template, and let's remove that from our cake. Let's give him a bit more shape on the nose. So can you see I've put it in the freezer for a little bit now because it was getting a bit soft. And this little bit here where there was a bump is actually the eye at the far side of his face. Put my template back on so I can mark this little bit, the bit that's kind of at the back of the mouth. So I'm just trying to carefully remove that bit. So we haven't done a lot of shaping, but I'm going to cover this now in ganache. Now it's not perfectly smooth. Those of you that watch my videos know that I'm not very good at getting it very smooth. But for this one, it doesn't matter. And I'm going to use a mix of fondant and modelling chocolate mixed together. You can use half and half. I just thought I'd give it a try because I usually just use fondant. And this little bit, sort of the back of the mouth, we're going to put a little bit of fondant in. And for this, I've used black and red mixed together to get this colour that we want. And I've also rolled it thin and kind of just placed it inside the mouth. Now, looking at my picture for guidance, I'm going to have a look at the bits that look really raised. So I think my eye needs to be a bit more raised, kind of above where the eyebrow area is. So I've used some of my fondant that's mixed with modelling chocolate, and it doesn't really matter what colour it is for this. And I've just stuck a piece on, can you see, above the eye? And then we're going to roll along snake shape. Can you see on his neck he's got like a big sort of vein or flap of skin? I'm not sure which it is. Anyway, we're going to roll those and stick those on. Keep looking at your picture for guidance. I'm just going to roll a small little ball for the eye. We'll leave that eye to one side now to dry. And I'm just going to keep building up the face. So I think I cut off a bit much of that eye at the far side. Although from above sometimes you don't see it. But I've stuck that back on. So I've just got some black edible powder. Again, I'll link what I've used in the description box below. I'm just darkening up the back of that mouth. I decided actually I need a bit more under the eye. And then we're going to make some little teeth. You can use your template as guidance. So can you see I've got a template that's not cut up here because I printed it off twice. But I quickly get fed up of making them match exact, so we're just going to do any size teeth and push them on. Now if they're not sticking, just put a little bit of edible glue on the top of each one. Just bend them round a little bit till you get them in place. Now I've rolled out that fondant and modelling chocolate mix. Don't roll it too thick, but then you don't want it ultra thin. Just make sure it's big enough to cover that whole cake that you've done. Now I've also let the ganache set a little bit as well. Otherwise you don't want it to be too soft. It'll squidge about underneath when we do this bit. So I'm just pressing lightly all the way around. Push it in nice and tight around that bottom edge and we'll trim off all this extra from around the bottom of our cake. And I'm just really carefully cutting the mouth. So I'll cut a little bit out at a time because I don't want to cut too much and find that I've taken too much off and we've too much gum on show. And just be really careful that you don't catch your teeth at this point. So I'm just going to drop my eye in the eye socket now. So my eye socket is quite deep and I don't want the eye to stick out as much as it does. So I'm just going to put some little pieces around it. So his upper and lower eyelids, can you see, just squashing that on. So I'm going to put a few pieces on, so a smaller one either side. Then I've just built it a little bit bigger. So can you see, just making that eye look a little bit narrower. Also, we're just going to poke a little hole in for the nostril. Again, have a look at where it is on your template for where it wants to be on your cake. So he's got a little sort of hole, I think it's his ear. I'm going to put some lines and things, and I'm just sort of pinching anywhere I want to look more like there's a fold of skin between like my finger and my tool. You can use 2 fingers if you like. Now, texture. I've got a few different texture mats that I wanted to play around with. This one's actually called Sand, but I thought it gives me nice small scales, so I'll just give it a once over all the way around with this, although it's not giving me a very strong impression. So I've swapped to a brickwork one. That looks a little bit better. It's still not overly strong, but we'll use this as like our base background texture. It's just tricky getting it around these little angles here. Try and sort of bend it if you can. And then the other one I've got is like an alligator skin one. Now this one was a much more expensive mould, and if you want you can actually draw them in yourself individually. It just depends how much time you've got on your hands. I've just pushed some individual pieces on by hand. It doesn't really matter what shape they are, I don't go for perfect circles. Then I'm going to go over with the pointy end of my little Dresden tool and I'm just going to draw in some scars and wrinkles, because on my picture that I'm copying from, it's got the odd little crack and scar. And I'm just playing around now, really experimenting with how to get the different scales, because it was taking me a long time putting them on individually. So I thought I'll get the piping bag out with a bit of royal icing, squeeze them on. So to attach it now to your board, just put a bit of buttercream or chocolate ganache onto your background in the middle and just pop your dinosaur on there. Now I'm going to fill in the background now. I've got some more pale green modelling paste. I've just sort of put it on in clumps and we're just going to texture it. Now I've found this little tool that kind of gives me like semicircle shapes. Again, I'm colouring them up with my edible dust, but I've added a little bit of rejuvenator into it this time so that it's more liquidy when I'm painting. Now let's start with the eye. And I've got a gooseberry green colour that we're just painting in. Again, it's mixed with the rejuvenator spirit. And I think we're going to give him a base colour using the caramel ivory. So I've diluted it quite a bit so it's quite runny. Just make sure that if you've piped royal icing on for scales that you've let them dry before you do this bit. So I'm going to do this all over. You can see if it's quite liquidy, it kind of runs into the creases and will dry a little bit darker in the creases, which looks nice. If you don't want it as runny or as liquidy, just put less rejuvenator in and more of your food colouring and it will give you a thicker paste. I'm just going to cover it all over now. Now it's turned out a bit green as this caramel ivory, so I'm just going to add a touch of the chestnut. Now I'm using the sugar flare colours for these bits. And try and go over slightly more concentrated, a little bit darker anywhere that's a bit more shaded. And I'm going to put a black dot in the middle of the eye. Now I'm just going to darken it up, so I've got some black food colour in here. Let's put this in the areas I want quite dark. Now this one's quite concentrated, so I'm just going to add a bit more rejuvenator to it just to lighten it. Can you see? So it gives me a more see-through effect when I'm painting that on. But for this I'm using, some of them are powdered colours, some of them are just the normal gel food colours. Go around with the black, darkening any areas that you think needs a bit more colour add into it. Now, I've just deepened the teeth as well, so either a brown or a black, really diluted, just brushed on there. And you're just going to keep going with the colour until you're happy with what it looks like. Let's put some more white in the eye. So at the moment, can you see I'm just adding a cream colour to the scars. I think the scars that he's got. There he is, all finished. And I get asked a lot how long it actually took me to make. So I did this over 2 days, and altogether, not including baking the cake, it took me about 10 hours. I hope you've enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching. If you liked the video, be sure to hit the thumbs up button and leave me a comment below. You can see more of my tutorials by clicking on the images on screen now. If you haven't already, make sure you click the subscribe button to stay up to date with my future tutorials. There are also links in the description box below where you can find me on Facebook, Instagram and more.